Should I bother with patch 8.2? I think that is the question that is going through many people's heads right now. So, today we are going to try to pick that apart. We're going to review the patch and work out who it's good for and who it's not good for. Hey everyone and welcome back to another Warcraft video. So yeah, patch 8.2, it's just about here. It has been on the PTR for quite some time indeed, and well yeah, it's coming out on the 25th, so right in line with Final Fantasy XIV Shadowbringers early access. So I think for a lot of people there's a bit of a decision to make there. And really in today's video, we're just going to be going through this patch, working out what it's doing that's good, what's bad, and essentially who it's for. We're going to kick it off with a more sort of general view of things, and we'll start that with the world content, because I think when people think about a new patch, they normally think about where am I going and what am I doing. So you're going to Nazjatar and you're going to Mechagon. That's where you're going. What you're doing, though, very much does depend on the two zones, and I think that's the interesting part of this patch. Nazjatar, I initially hoped would be a bit more, just a bit more fresh. But being real with you, Nazjatar is just another big outdoor zone. It has storyline that you go through, it has world quests, it has those sort of objectives that you do on a daily basis. Now, there are some good improvements. So it has a war mode thing called the Battle for Nazjatar. That's a really, really cool system. I really like that. And it does have events that can crop up, which I think are another really good step forward. However, it very much is an iteration on, say, an Argus/Tanan jungle type of experience. Now, that said, if we're going like for like, it is still a lot better than, say, the Broken Shore of the Middle of Legion, right? So it is a pretty darn solid zone. It just very much is a typical WoW outdoor zone. That's pretty much what you're getting there, and that means that for the people who are just fine continuing to play through that style of content, you will actually have a lot of playtime there. There's reputations to go through, there are rare mobs to kill to get the achievement. There is quite a lot, and there's definitely a few more things extra with Nazjatar than there would have been in previous zones. So it does seem to be, by all accounts, a very good zone as far as a traditional WoW zone goes, but it still is a traditional WoW zone. It's not going to be massively transformative, and it will be providing you with, I would say, a very well-executed version of a familiar gameplay experience. Now, let's move on to Mechagon, because Mechagon is very different. It's the one that I'm personally a lot more interested in, based off my playtime in the PTR, and yeah, essentially, if you liked Timeless Isles, you'll probably really like Mechagon. Now, Mechagon, there are some gear rewards from there, and I will talk about those in a bit, but it's not really somewhere you go for the gear. There are mounts and pets, sort of different types of rewards for your character. And what I think is a lot better about Mechagon is that it is a bit more freeform. Now, it is true that that means it's a bit more grindy. You're going to be going and trying to get all the spare parts you can get and all of the blue and epic Mechagon-specific resources, but I will say that I found the process of that to be pretty fun. And the main reason why is it's just a well-designed zone. The progression through it is pretty well-designed, and importantly, I think a lot of the gameplay there, it just feels a lot more permissible because it's all in the service of entirely self-set goals. It's like, I want the Mechano Saber, and I want to get some paint jobs for it. Okay, here's how I do it. So you go out, and sure, it's a bit grindy, but it's some self-set stuff for you to do, which I think does make content like that feel a lot better than feeling like you're mandated to do it to get to the next stage of a quest that you maybe need to unlock an achievement or something like that. So I'd say that Mechagon is really quite good indeed. There's a lot more experimentation there. There's interesting things like the kind of weird like Terminator thing they've got going on where the spider bots are everywhere and it's like post-apocalypse with Chromie. That's really cool. And it's just a more playful, fun zone. I think it's a really big win. I think it's a big win in many of the ways the Timeless Isles were a big win, and I think players will enjoy it quite a bit. I'm not necessarily sure if players will just be screaming its praises on launch day, but what I think will happen is you'll see this massive burst in Nazjatar playtime because it's the main new zone, and that's where all the benthic gear comes from. But I think that over time you'll just see that Mechagon Mechagon, like, has quite a long tail to it. I think that's pretty much what the numbers would show, not that we have access to them. So there is the two sort of core bits of world content. I think they are both better than what we have. I think the Nazjatar is iterative, and to somebody with my desires for in-game content and WoW, it being a bit iterative is a bit of a disappointment, but at least Mechagon is there, and I think that is a hell of a lot better than what we've been used to. So overall, I would say the world content it's not a massive victory, but it is a victory. So now that we've covered that, let's talk about the narrative content of this patch. And, you know, this is a weird one. I don't think it's the type of content that people really enjoy playing a massive amount when it's in the war campaign kind of format. I think what went down a lot better was, say, Suramar, and I don't think they're getting close to Suramar here. It very much is just the standard Battle for Azeroth style war campaign type of questing. So be it Nazjatar or the war campaign, that's essentially what you're getting. It very much is the standard World of Warcraft narrative stuff where it's pretty easy, there's no real challenge, there aren't super interesting rewards, it's just a kind of a thing that you do, I guess, while you unlock parts of the zone in the case of Nazjatar. I think Blizzard could probably innovate a good bit more in this area, and you know, it's interesting. I think that for those who really enjoy the lore, there is really cool writing here, but it's not really like narrative gameplay. It's just, fun stuff to absorb while you're doing your normal World of Warcraft tasks. It's the kind of thing where I think a similar amount of enjoyment would be got whether it's watching Nobble's coverage of it or playing it, because I think most of the interest there is not really in experiencing that story. I think it's far more about knowing, oh, what's new in the story of World of Warcraft? Where's that going? Because there's a prior interest in the story of World of Warcraft, and not necessarily because Blizzard are making a super high quality 8-hour campaign. Now, in terms of running time, I'd say it is also pretty true that the narrative content of this patch doesn't really have a massive runtime, which I think is probably what most people would expect. Now, that said, it is decently varied. You have the stuff where you're going around with the champions of Azeroth, Magni and co. You're going around the Dragonflight, so that's one sort of story thread. Then you've got your main story in Nazjatar, and then you've got the war campaign. Neither are massively long, but it is, I suppose, nice to see a little bit of variety there. So it very much is, I'd say, a take it or leave it thing. I don't think it's really a massive draw for the patch, though. And with the narrative cover, let's move on to something entirely different, and that is systems. And we'll kick it off with the Essences system. So, look, right, here's the deal. The Essences don't fix the classes. Now, I don't really think Blizzard would have ever claimed that they would have fixed the classes, even though that's what I think a lot of people would have wanted from them. Now, of course, the essences, they are not like class-specific, bar one essence, which affects your class abilities. They are just general effects, which I would say are not class or spec-specific, but they do tie into the gameplay rules of the game, and I think they're decently engaging, actually. I think it's a really good progression system. I like how they have designed it. I like how you go out, you earn the different ranks of your essences, you slot them into your heart, and once you've earned them, you've earned them. There's no time forging, there's nothing like that. It's not a solve to the class design issues of the game. It is just another toy for your classes, and that definitely does help a good bit. And it's far more a solve to the Battle for Azeroth, or not the Battle for Azeroth problems, though I suppose they are one and the same, the Heart of Azeroth problems that we've had so far with the Azerite gear, where the essences just are far more impactful than the Azerite traits that you will have got. But unlike the Azerite traits, you're not constantly, replacing them as you say, get some new shoulders or a new head. And I think that does mean it's a far, far better system. You just kind of look at your list of things that you can unlock, and even if it kind of taps into a bit of that completionism where you just want to go and get all the essences. So because of that, I think that as far as external class systems go, it's actually a really good one, because unlike even elements of the Legion artifacts, well, on this, you've got your major slot, you've got your 2 minor slots, and then you just have a whole bunch of essences. Unlock them at your own pace, mix and match which ones you want. Sure, some will be the best for different scenarios, but I think it's a really good system. You can fiddle around with that. Maybe between the essences that you have and your class's talents, you can create a specified build, right? That's sort of more tailored to what you want to do in the game. And I think things like that are really good for World of Warcraft. That's the kind of, I guess that's the kind of like class experimentation that I think is more fun than just, crunching a bunch of numbers, even though it probably is just going to boil down to that. Simply put, though, it's a lot better than the state that we were in, where you were looking at a bunch of random damage effects on Azerite traits and just thinking, these are really boring effects, but they actually matter a lot, so I need to go onto Blood Mallet or something like that. So overall, I would say essences are a big win. Now, there's also the Azerite traits to cover, and it's kind of weird. So the Azerite traits are still fundamentally kind of annoying because it's just hard to get a good build when you're also changing your gear all the time, and I really don't like having to maintain the multiple gear sets. I just think the UI and like that interaction flow is really quite sucky. But that said, you do have your outer ring, which gives you more choices. You've then got your inner ring, so that gives you a lot more traits. And in terms of how Blizzard have actually costed all of those, there's basically no Heart of Azeroth farming for the sake of Azerite stuff. So that whole problem where you were farming to re-unlock traits you'd already unlocked, man, how tedious. That is not a problem in this patch. So while the Azerite gear is still not really that great, well, we're getting a lot of new effects through the essences. We're still maintaining a whole bunch of new stuff through the Azerite gear. It at least is giving your characters more stuff. It's not ideal. I think Blizzard know it's not ideal. I doubt it's the sort of thing we'll see in the next expansion, but I think by virtue of the Azerite traits mattering less, they are now less of a problem in the game. That's pretty much how I'd put that one. And then I suppose when I run through other things, like there's stuff like, say, the Pet Battle Mega Dungeon, which, is really quite good. And I guess, speaking of dungeons, there's the Mechagon Mega Dungeon, which, again, looks really, really, really good. And from the reports that I've heard, is actually a really good bit of content. That's wonderful to see. So if you enjoy dungeons, that's going to be a good thing to come and experience. The, the Mythic Plus stuff is... it's the same Battle for Azeroth Mythic Plus dungeons. If, you'll pretty much know if you like those already. I don't think I need to go through that whole system again. And then, of course, there is Ashara's Eternal Palace. That seems to be worse than Dazar'alor, just based on, I think Preach is who I would trust the most in this sort of thing. So based on, hearing Preach's thoughts, I don't think it's that amazing of a raid. Seems to be perfectly fine with, some pretty good bosses, and according to him anyway, a few that are pretty gimmicky and not that good. So maybe not as good as Dazar'alor if you're purely going here as a raider, but I think it definitely is a far more broad patch that will have a more broad appeal, though maybe less so to the people who pretty much just want to raid and then log off and pretty much have that be the way that they experience World of Warcraft. So I think now that we've just covered generally those things, I do want to hop into some highlights and lowlights, and we'll start off with the highlights. For me, highlight number one has got to be itemization and gearing. They have really tried hard recently to make the gear more interesting in World of Warcraft, and let's be real, they really need to, because it's been quite an issue. So when we look at the benthic gearing system, that's actually quite great. I really like how it is, it's a gearing system that you just progress through in a pretty fair and honest way. You work out the benthic gear that you want. There's a little bit of RNG in initially getting the gear, but the actual upgrade process is, nice and honest and above board. You've got no Titan forging. You've got no random stuff to contend with. They have fixed stat templates so you can kind of plan out what you want for your character. So I think that's a really good gearing system. But then the benthic gear also has really cool special effects. Well, not really cool, but pretty cool. And you can kind of work out which benthic special effects do I want. And then we look at, say, the Ashara's Eternal Palace raid gear. Once again, like with the Crucible of Storms, loads of that raid gear has just nice little effects on it. Things that make individual bits of gear actually memorable, actually stand out from each other, not just be a different combination of stats. That's so much more interesting. That means that when you look at this new raid, you can kind of think, well, here's this really cool set of pants. I want to get that. It's got some cool effects. Maybe it will go well with some benthic gloves. I don't know, but you kind of get the point. Then when we look at Mechagon, right, you've got the punch card trinket. That thing is so cool. So it's a trinket, but it's got it's got 3 gem slots. They're called punch cards, but it's 3 slots or 3 or 4 slots. Anyway, it's got slots. And then you can unlock different things to put into those slots, and they will give you different effects. Like there's a more sort of throughput combat focused one. There's ones that are more stat focused. There's ones that are more utility focused. And that's really cool. You build your own trinket. That is a novel thing to do in the game. So when you look just across the itemization here, we've got the benthic system, which basically is the best form of new patch upgrade gear that we've got. I mean, it just wipes the floor with those like Argus, random tokens that we got. It's so much better. So that's so much better. And you look at the itemization of that gear and the design of that, it's so much more interesting. So even if BFA still has a whole bunch of issues, if that thing can be carried forward into the next expansion, that'll be a really, really good thing for players. So itemization in this patch actually gets a pretty big win. I mean, we'll have to wait and see what it's like for balance, but just the idea of, you've got your essences, which means all the passive effects and the new ability for your class, or new major effect, and then you've got all the stuff that comes from your gear now, with that all being customizable. So much better. So definitely a big win. And then also the essences themselves, I've already covered most of those, but again, I think they're a big win. I think they kind of have the potential to be the best version of this type of thing that Blizz have done. Now, they're obviously marred by their connection to existing BFA systems that people don't particularly like, myself included, but if you just had a system like this from the start of an expansion, I think it would actually go down quite well. So, those, imagine the essences essentially were legendary effects, and, I mean, being real, this is, I think, in winter 2017, the winter after BFA came out. I kind of pretty much proposed this as a thing, where basically I got pretty salty at the legendaries in Legion, and so I just thought to myself, what if you yank the effects out of the legendaries and just have 2 or 3 of them be socketable on your legendary weapon? That's pretty much what we've got with this new system. And I mean, yeah, I kind of liked it back when I first thought up about that idea back then, and I certainly still like it now. So I think it's really quite good. Obviously it has some PR and optics issues because it is attached to, it's attached to the heart, and the heart's obviously not the most popular thing in the universe, but I think it's a pretty solid system. And, it's been weird. There's been a lot of people saying that it's like the Netherlight Crucible and stuff like that. I think those sentiments have mostly died down because, they're literally not true, now that people have kind of got a bit more familiar with the essences. So I think they'll actually go down pretty decently with the average player. I think for the real top-end people, there might be downsides to that system and sort of balance issues, but I think for the average WoW player, it's a cool new power that you can get that comes with customization and has a non-super RNG, super fair, good unlock system that I think people will appreciate. And then I suppose for me, the other highlight is Mechagon. As I've said, it's just more playful, it's more self-directed, it's more of a sandbox, and that's just the type of thing that I think World of Warcraft needs just heaps more of. It's not going far enough, sure, but it's a very, very good first step, and I definitely commend them for that, and it seems very clear to me that just when you look at the contrast between Mechagon and Azure, it's clearly an experiment. It clearly is an experiment to see, what do players like immediately and what do players actually keep on playing over time. So I would not be surprised if Mechagon turns out really good and we see more of its ideas worked into the world content of the next expansion. And then I suppose the final, highlight for me is there are a lot of new rewards like mounts and pets and stuff like that to go after in this patch. And while I know that is not a major part of the game for loads of the people who watch these videos, I do know that there is a very cosmetics and kind of character progression, but not just in the throughput way. There's a lot of people who really love that, who watch these videos, and I think for you, this patch is doing a really good job. There's loads of cool new mechs, there's loads of cool new sort of underwater themed mounts, there's flying, there's a lot there, so I think this patch is actually doing what it needs to in that regard, and that'll provide people with good reasons to come back. More importantly, it also will provide the game with kind of evergreen content, because if you skip this patch and then come back in 8.3, well, unlike a lot of the gearing systems that will be replaced, a lot of those mount unlocks, they still will exist as viable content to do. So it's always good to see those things be kept up and maintained because they do last into the future. So with that, let's talk about some lowlights. I think World of Warcraft's single-player sort of story stuff, to me, it still is a bit of a letdown. I think Blizzard think it's better than it is, and I think that results in them leaning a bit too heavily on it as a super interesting thing in a new patch, where I just think they need to try to innovate there or do something different. It very much seems like they're trying to provide a big hype campaign thing for people to play through, but that sometimes comes at the cost of just a good RPG for your character, and it's just maybe more like they're playing to their weaknesses rather than their strengths. I think that's been an issue for a while, and I think that does continue to be an issue with the sort of single-player-ish narrative content of this patch. Then I guess there's the new raid, which does not seem to be as good as Desire Lore, although that said, Desire Lore might have been one of the best raids ever, so it's not like every single one's going to be completely hitting it out of the park, but, I mean, certainly looking at what feedback has been, it's not really made me super hyped to experience that, even though, I mean, the lore and the art and all that stuff is undoubtedly pretty darn cool. And then I guess on the topic of the raid, well, yeah, there's no set pieces. That I think is unfortunate. Let's be real. The new armor from this raid is not great. I don't think it's the type of thing that people will be excited to get now, and I don't think it's the type of thing that people will be excited to do transmog runs of in the future. So I think the lingering problems of that initial decision are still haunting Blizzard and haunting the game. Then I suppose in terms of other things that are a bit of a low light, the mount equipment, I think that could have been a lot more about player customization and just fun, right? But instead, I think it's just ended up being a very simple problem-solving thing where, you know, it just exists so that people don't have to use the Water Strider. I think they could have really taken a different path with that and made it about making your mount feel super powerful and customizing it and unlocking really cool things for your mounts. But they didn't do that. They went with a far more simple system that I think just isn't really that fun and kind of removes some of the uniqueness from things that I thought were, well, pretty cool because they were unique. Then I guess Nazjatar, yeah, it could have been more like world quests are still world quests. They're too spread out. I wish they had taken more inspiration from the faction incursions of 8.1. I think when world quests are overlapping with a more cohesive theme, I think that's a lot more interesting than what we've seen in the PTR. Now that said, the events are pretty cool. The battle for Nazjatar is also really cool, but just that world quest system, that world quest game loop, I think Blizzard do need to make that a fair bit better. I think they've been just a little bit lackadaisical when it comes to innovating in that. And there are ways that even within the current World Quest framework, they could make those feel a bit more exciting and have the gameplay be a little bit better. But right now, it very much is still the do your World Quest, travel segment, do your world quest, travel segment, do your world quest, hand your thing in, and it's not particularly incredible. Now that said, there are the little objectives that you will complete while you're doing your world quest. That does give you a bit of that quest stacking feel, but I mean, yeah, I think they could have done better there, being real with you. Then, I mean, heroic warfronts, islands, I'm not really that excited for either of them. I don't think they're really reasons why people will be coming back to the game, I'll put it that way. And yeah, I think that's it for the highlights and the lowlights of this patch. That's the stuff that really calls out to me. So let's get back to the core question of this video, which is, should you return to this patch? And I think it's pretty simple. If you started Battle for Azeroth and even, you know, in spite of the sort of depowering and the class, the class gameplay being a little bit pared down, but you still fundamentally enjoyed doing some dungeons, doing a bit of PvP, going through your world quests, going through the zones and their stories, if that's the type of way that you enjoy World of Warcraft and you want to go and, you know, do that stuff, spend a while doing some mounts, maybe just put 1 or 2 months into the game, check out the raid and PTR, and then just kind of think, yeah, I've had my fill, I'll come back in the next patch. Well, I think if you're that type of player, this patch is actually really well designed for you. And the reason why I say that is because, yep, there's a big new whack of content to do in terms of the single-player story stuff. There is Mechagon, which will keep you busy for I think a pretty chunky period of time. There's just your general Nazjatar progression, which again, if you generally like that so far in WoW, there's another big chunk of it. And yes, it is a bit better than it has been in the past, so that's all going to be pretty good. You've got really cool mounts to unlock, and no doubt there'll be some fun secrets and stuff like that they've cooked up. There'll be a new raid to do in LFR if you want to sort of casually do that, or normal or heroic if you're with your guild. All of that stuff for the kind of casual interested World of Warcraft player is done well in this patch. You've got itemization that's way more interesting. You've got your new trinket in Mechagon, and then you'll go around trying to get all the punch cards. You've got a big new mega dungeon. It's actually a really big patch with a lot of pretty darn solid content. So if you were just kind of like, if you were still having fun in BFA in spite of some of its issues, and you just kind of felt like, you know, 8.1 didn't add enough, 8.15 didn't add enough, and it just felt like the game was in a bit of a slump, well, this patch certainly has a lot of things for you to go and do, and even thinking of that benthic gearing system, again, that's a whole bunch of gameplay, a whole bunch of time in that. So yeah, if basically, another slice of World of Warcraft has been served up to you, and it is a good bit better than the initial BFA slice of content. So if you're still sort of hungry for that, this patch absolutely does have stuff for you. Now, I will say that if you're somebody who sort of begrudgingly played through Battle for Azeroth and just, you really don't like the classes, and I know there's been a lot of people who have said that, like, it doesn't matter if the islands are amazing or the new zone is amazing, I just don't enjoy playing the game because of, like, its gameplay. Well, there's not really anything in this patch that'll fix that. The essences might give you a few new bells and whistles, same goes for the new itemization of that gear, but fundamentally, the classes are the classes. They are BFA classes. I think there's a very large chance that 9.0 will be doing a lot more with those classes. Blizzard have said in interviews a lot of things that do seem to suggest to me anyway that they understand why classes are not really that great, that they pare down too much, they reduce button count too much, they double down in spec for spec identity instead of class identity. They've said things that are kind of encouraging, and maybe that just means that if you're really that type of player, 9.0 is maybe the next time you should be reconsidering World of Warcraft again, because that stuff's probably just out of scope of BFA. Definitely sad to say that, but being realistic for that type of player, that's kind of what I think. And then I suppose if you didn't really like the core of Battle for Azeroth, but you're kind of interested in something that's better than it, and that is actually where I personally am, yeah, I think there could be a reason to go back here, and this is really where it kind of comes the closest to how I personally feel. So I'll be real with you. In Battle for Azeroth, the glass shattered for me so fast. It's never shattered that fast. Just, that time where you're doing all your WoW things, then you sit down at the computer and you're like, hang on a second, I've just stopped caring. You kind of get that weird moment, and for me, that's just when I kind of realized the Azerite treadmill is never going to end. I don't really like the Heart of Azeroth stuff. I don't like the Azerite traits. There's not enough stuff at endgame to do that's like good as an RPG, like Suramar, and for me, that happened really quickly in BFA, I'll be completely honest with you, and I've not had much drive to play the game in this expansion. So when I, from that perspective, look at this patch, well, Mechagon, I'm a lot more interested in that. Way more interested, because I think back to the Timeless Isles, I put a lot of time in there, and Mechagon seems to be doing that again. So that is something that, to me, is new and interesting as compared to the average World of Warcraft experience, honestly, for like the last 4 or 5 years. So that's pretty good. Then the itemization. I was so bored of WoW gear. Well, now there's a bunch of new, far more interesting WoW gear. There's my punch card, and that I think will tie into the essences, which I genuinely, they're a really good fit for me, I think, as a player. So essentially, from my perspective, not really liking BFA, but kind of liking a lot of the new ideas in this patch, well, to me, yeah, it's worth playing, and I will definitely be playing earnestly, giving it giving Old Country try, a really good shot for the first month, and properly playing my character. I've been leveling up my hunter again because I want to do that on a fresh character that's kind of just free from BFA baggage. So that's how I'm going to be doing it. So yes, the answer to the initial part of this video, should you come back to World of Warcraft? I mean, it was never going to be a yes or a no. It always was going to be it depends. But I hope that I've been able to tease out what that question will be like, depending on what type of player you are and on what parts of World of Warcraft that you appreciate. So there you go. That's my thoughts on this topic. I will be returning to this patch. I'll be giving it a good shot. I'll be going through my essences, picking up my punch card, going through Mechagon, and probably getting some, nice swimmy boys in Nazjatar. So that's what I'm doing. Let me know what you're doing down below, and stay tuned to the channel because there will be all the usual, guide content and all that for this patch. Thank you very much for watching this slightly more rambly, rather extended video, and with that, I will see you next time.